"You're not on the list! Step aside!" The words split the afternoon heat like a whip crack, sharp and final. They echoed across the concrete walkway outside the federal courthouse, carried by the dry wind, stinging sharper than the sun that beat down without mercy. A woman in heels, crisply dressed in black, stood at the edge of a folding table shaded by a plastic canopy. On the table sat 3 bottles of water, sweating in the heat. Her manicured hand hovered possessively near them. Just 2 feet away, the old man didn't move. He was still, ramrod straight, yet visibly wilting, a slow collapse concealed behind a uniform that had once stood in the killing fields of 2 wars. The creases in his trousers were knife-edged. His buttons gleamed. His silver nameplate, slightly dulled with age, read, "Ellis Monroe." His hand trembled faintly as it rested on his cane, not from weakness, but from dehydration. He had asked for a drink, nothing more. Another voice joined the administrators. "You think that uniform gives you special rights? Not here." A security officer stepped forward, eyes narrowed behind mirrored lenses. He tilted his head toward the woman, who picked up one of the water bottles slowly, theatrically, as if weighing its worth. She turned it in her hand, its plastic wrapping crinkling faintly under her fingers. Then she lowered it back onto the table with an audible thunk. The bottle rocked slightly, stilled. "Not for you." The veteran didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't even look up. Just let the silence sit, taut as a sniper's breath. The collar of his dress shirt clung to his neck, stained dark with sweat. A droplet traced the ridgeline of his temple, caught in the edge of a faded silver service star, stitched into his shoulder seam. Behind him, a dozen citizens watched. A man with a briefcase, a mother and her child, 2 young lawyers whispering behind coffee cups. But no one stepped forward. No one offered a hand. Not yet. Across the street, the hum of a black government vehicle came to a stop. Its engine idled low. Behind the windshield, unmoving, sat a man in a clean-pressed uniform of his own. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. On the passenger seat beside him, a cap rested gently in place, untouched, unworn. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The courthouse plaza shimmered under the August sun, a great gray plate of concrete radiating heat like the deck of a ship in war-zone noon. The air held that breathless stillness, the kind that comes just before a summer storm or just after a moral line is crossed. The old man shifted slightly, one careful footstep to the side, as if even the earth beneath him had grown too hot to bear. His name was Master Sergeant Ellis Monroe, 84 years old, but the lines in his face suggested older wars. His frame was narrow now, bone pressed against metal-threaded fabric, but upright, always upright. No one knew his name here. Not yet. But that would change. It always did. Just never in the moment when it mattered most. Ellis had come not for attention, not for protest, not even to be seen. He had come to witness, to quietly stand as a silent honor guard for a citizenship ceremony happening inside the courthouse that day. He came every year on this exact date. Same uniform, same silver tie pin shaped like a flag at half-mast. He never crossed the threshold of the building. He always stood outside in the open. He believed ceremonies of belonging should be witnessed in sunlight. Inside the marble atrium, a young man, the son of a soldier Ellis once pulled from a wrecked Humvee near the Cambodian border, would be raising his hand today, pledging allegiance to the only country his father ever trusted. Ellis had never missed a ceremony. He didn't intend to now, not for weather, not for age, not for cruelty. He had not taken water, not even a drop. He hadn't asked for seating. He had refused an offered umbrella earlier in the morning with a gentle shake of the head and a gravel-thick whisper. Uniforms were meant to breathe. His body soaked in the sun's weight like it had soaked in desert winds long before this plaza was poured. Stillness was his rebellion. Silence, his discipline. The moment passed, but the tension clung like static on wool. The small crowd began to fidget. A young mother with a stroller edged closer, eyes flicking between Ellis and the water station. A boy tugged on her sleeve, whispering up, "Mom, is he okay?" She didn't answer. Ellis shifted once more, ever so slightly. His knees cracked, that sharp, wooden echo that betrayed a lifetime of hard landings. He steadied himself with a slow inhale. The leather strap of his watch creaked softly as he adjusted his grip on the cane. Beneath the edges of his pant cuffs, the shine of his shoes had dulled where salt and time had chewed at the polish. The breeze stirred only once, carrying with it the faint notes of children laughing down the block, a distant construction hammer, and a high whistle of a bird circling overhead. But at the center of that windless ring stood Ellis, motionless, disciplined, forgotten. He blinked slowly, one long blink. Inside the black sedan across the street, the driver's mirrored sunglasses remained fixed on the scene. His hands never left the wheel. His cap, the one with the weight of 4 stars and 4 decades, remained untouched. But it was not just waiting. It was remembering. The bench near the courthouse wall was older than it looked, its slats worn smooth not by design, but by years of hesitant use. Ellis Monroe lowered himself onto it slowly, as if placing each joint down one at a time. He did not groan, did not sigh. The only sound was the whisper of pressed wool against wood, and the faint clink of his medals settling with him. His cap, precise and clean, rested atop his right knee, the bill pointing forward like a ship's bow. The heat had begun to settle deep into his back now, like warm iron pushed between his shoulders. He reached into the left breast pocket of his jacket and withdrew a small white cloth, folded twice, like everything else he owned. With movements honed by ritual, he dabbed his forehead once, then the back of his neck, then returned the cloth to its post. Not a drop fell, not a breath wasted. To his left, the glass doors of the courthouse opened again, a burst of air-conditioned air escaping like a luxury. A pair of young lawyers strode out, lattes in hand, and arrogance trailing behind them like perfume. One noticed Ellis. She glanced down briefly, her lip curling at the sight of his rigid posture and the ribbons on his chest. She leaned toward her colleague. "If he's too proud to ask," she muttered, "maybe he should stay home." Her companion chuckled, not even looking. Halloween came early. Ellis did not turn his head. He did not react. Only his thumb moved, slowly brushing the brass edge of his service cap. The gesture was almost imperceptible, a quiet centering, like a pilot checking instruments during turbulence. He adjusted his cuffs next, drawing them tight over trembling wrists. One button was missing, but the crease down his sleeve was sharp enough to cut paper. His boots, spit-shine though cracked, remained still beneath him, heels planted just under the bench as if he were bracing for something unseen. A man passed, pushing a delivery cart stacked with folders and boxes. He looked at Ellis, hesitated, then looked away. The cart's wheels rattled loudly against the concrete as it passed. A pigeon landed not far from Ellis's shoe and pecked at the hot sidewalk. It paused, cocked its head up at him, then fluttered away. The heat thickened. A single bead of sweat trailed from behind Ellis's ear and disappeared into the collar seam of his uniform, which had frayed slightly at the back, not from neglect, but from time. Time spent standing, waiting, bearing. A child from the earlier crowd tugged free from her father's grip and tiptoed toward the bench. She held a small carton of juice, the kind with a plastic straw sticking out crooked. She reached out, silent and curious. Before she could get closer, her father snapped, "Leave him alone, honey," and gently pulled her back. "He doesn't want that." Ellis glanced at the girl. No smile, just a soft blink. She hesitated, then offered a timid wave before vanishing behind her father's leg. He turned his gaze forward again, straight into the sunlight, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause, as if even the courthouse had gone quiet, watching this old soldier hold the line, not against bullets or explosions, but indifference. And still he did not ask. The shadow arrived before the voice. A square of darkness fell across Ellis's knees, blocking the sun just enough to be noticed, just enough to signal authority. He didn't look up, not at first. He had learned long ago that silence could be armor when words became weakness. "I warned you already," the voice snapped. Crisp heels clacked against the concrete as the courthouse administrator stepped in front of him again, arms folded tightly over a stack of folders. "You've been loitering all morning. This isn't a memorial." Ellis remained still. A breath slower than the last left his lips. The administrator leaned closer, her shadow now fully eclipsing him. "You need to go home." Nothing in his posture changed, but the knuckles on the hand holding his cap tightened slightly, just enough to stretch the worn leather edge. He lifted his gaze finally, eyes glassy but focused, like a man still calculating distance even as the world blurred. "I came to watch a ceremony," he said quietly, the syllables soft and rounded like sand worn smooth in a canteen pouch. She scoffed. "Then go inside like everyone else. Standing out here like this doesn't make you a hero." From the far edge of the courtyard, a young man with a messenger bag stepped forward. Barely older than 20, he wore a security badge clipped awkwardly to his belt, and a thin tie loosened at the neck. He hesitated, then reached into his bag, pulling out a small plastic bottle of water, condensation clinging to its sides, the cap still sealed. "Sir," he said gently, approaching, "I have an extra. Please." He extended the bottle toward Ellis, both hands open, like an offering. The administrator spun on him like a knife, flashing in sunlight. "Absolutely not," she barked. "He's not allowed to accept outside items. Security protocol." The young man blinked. "But it's just water. Do you want to be written up?" Her tone cracked like ice. The intern froze. His hand hovered between them, the bottle glistening, an oasis out of reach. He took a half step back. Ellis lifted his hand, palm slightly raised. Not in anger, not in dismissal, just control. "It's all right, son." The bottle wavered, then slowly retreated. The intern looked down, ashamed, and returned to the fringe of the crowd, though now he lingered, watching, breathing heavier than before. A breeze stirred the flags above the courthouse entrance. High above, the stars and stripes fluttered briefly, then fell still again. A woman in the crowd turned to her friend and whispered something, unheard, but sharp enough to cut by expression alone. The administrator pulled a folder from her stack and shook it toward Ellis. "I don't care what you wore 50 years ago. You're not on the list today." Then, as if to seal the moment, she walked to the small refreshment table stationed near the courthouse door, the one marked "Staff and Approved Guests Only." A cooler sat half open beside it. With 2 fingers, she reached in, pulled the last visible bottle from the chilled interior, held it up for a moment, then set it deliberately back down. Her eyes never left Ellis. "Not for you." The sound of her heels receded again, echoing against the marble columns as she disappeared into the cool, shaded entrance. Ellis sat alone once more. The sun had moved a little higher. His hands remained folded in his lap, cap between them, as sweat darkened the fabric beneath his arms. His lips were cracked now, the corner of one bleeding faintly. But still, he made no sound, no complaint, only the breath of a man who had learned long ago how to wait. He waited until the sun struck the bench squarely, the heat no longer softened by shadows, no more drifting clouds to interrupt its full weight. Ellis unbuttoned the top clasp of his collar, just enough to ease the pressure without compromising the uniform's form. He didn't tug. He didn't fan himself. He simply adjusted with a motion that mirrored 1,000 mornings spent in preparation, back when men dressed for battle long before the shooting began. From the same breast pocket he had used every Memorial Day, he drew out a handkerchief. Not white, not printed, olive green, worn thin in the corners, creased cleanly into thirds. He unfolded it with methodical care and dabbed the center of his forehead, pressing into the crease where skin had begun to burn beneath the sun's harsh judgment. The movement was small, controlled, the way one might handle a wounded bird. He wiped once more, then folded the cloth again, tucked it back into his pocket with the same practiced care, and brought his cap down into his lap. Across the plaza, The doors of the courthouse yawned open and shut as people passed. None looked his way. Not anymore. The crowd that had momentarily formed earlier had dissolved back into the day's indifferent rhythm. The administrator was gone. The intern had returned inside. Only a pigeon bobbed near the edge of the planter behind Ellis, pecking at nothing in particular, then hopping back into the shade. Ellis closed his eyes, and for a moment, not even full seconds, the heat gave way to something else. A field hospital, dimly lit, canvas walls flapping. He was younger then, the taste of metal and dust thick in his throat. Rain slapping the edge of a stretcher as he knelt beside it. A young soldier, barely breathing, lungs wheezing through blood. Ellis reached for his belt, unscrewed the dented canteen with fingers slick with ash, tilted it. "Easy," he whispered. "You're still here. That's enough." The soldier had lived. The scar down his ribcage would become a wedding day story. A scar earned and shared. Ellis opened his eyes again, but slower this time. The sunlight felt heavier. The bench beneath him radiated heat now, turning the wood beneath his palms into a low simmer. He shifted his position slightly, but not for comfort, just to redistribute the ache in his spine, the pain that had long ago settled between two vertebrae and made itself a permanent resident. His hand moved to his lapel. The flag pin, simple, brass, its edges dulled from years of wear. He unclasped it carefully, as if holding something alive. He studied it for a moment, his thumb brushing gently along the stripes. No one watching would have known the names behind that gesture. But Ellis remembered each one, not in a list, not in order, just flashes, voices in mud, laughter in trenches, silence where there should have been song. He raised the pin to eye level, letting the light catch its surface, not to display it, not for ceremony, but as if checking it, as if reminding it that it still mattered. And then he pinned it back. There was no speech, no sigh, no adjustment, just a man returning something to its rightful place. His hands then moved to his belt buckle. Brass as well, scuffed at the edges. He adjusted it with the same reverence. He had never let his uniform fall into casual wear. Not once, not even today. The shoes were shined, the creases in his trousers sharp, the medals arranged in their proper rows, even if the fabric beneath them had faded from black to almost blue in certain light. He straightened once more, not fully, not like he used to, when his spine could still obey without question, but enough that his chest lifted slightly, his shoulders rolled back, and his chin aligned with the horizon. His breathing steadied. His fingers rested on his thighs, curled only slightly, not trembling anymore, not visibly. It was not defiance. It was memory. It was habit. It was survival. It was the last defense of a man who had given everything and asked nothing. And in that stillness, that quiet, salt-stained dignity, something shifted in the air. The bystanders who had stopped looking now found themselves drawn back by nothing they could name. A silence deeper than heat settled into the concrete, into the benches, into the flag that barely fluttered on the courthouse pole. Someone across the street stepped from a black sedan, and the whisper of a door closing gently marked the moment the world began to change. The black sedan's engine, until now a soft murmur beneath the city's noise, clicked off with a final mechanical sigh. It had been idling for close to 30 minutes, not idly, but patiently. From behind the tinted windshield, he had seen it all. The denial, the degradation, the silence that followed. And now, finally, the moment to move had arrived. The door opened slowly, its heavy frame whispering open with the hush of polished steel. A polished boot stepped out first, not scuffed, not dusty, but perfectly black and mirror-shined, as though not a single step had touched earth in days. Then came the leg, crisp olive fabric creased with knife-edge precision, followed by the hand, gloved in dark leather, resting lightly on the roof of the car as the man rose. General Douglas T. Blake, 4 stars pressed like medals of gravity onto each shoulder, stood upright beneath the sun. He did not blink beneath its glare. His gaze traveled the courtyard with calm certainty, but his expression revealed nothing, no anger, no sorrow. Just a still, unreadable depth, like the surface of water before the first ripple breaks it. His cap remained in the car, resting, untouched, but he wore his full dress uniform without a single element out of alignment. He stepped forward with the quiet stride of someone who had once moved under fire without flinching. His walk was slow, unhurried, not theatrical, but deliberate, purposeful. It was the kind of pace that made people pause without understanding why. Heads turned, first a couple by the fountain, then a city clerk on her phone, then a courier wheeling a cart full of envelopes. All of them watched as the general crossed the courtyard with no escort, no announcement, no fanfare. The courthouse doors hissed open again. The administrator stepped through, now holding a clipboard, flanked by another officer. She didn't notice him at first. She was busy scanning the names, frustrated with some last-minute change in the schedule. Her eyes moved rapidly, lips pursed in silent calculation. The officer beside her adjusted his belt, looking around vaguely, his attention drifting toward the heat haze just beyond the sidewalk. Then the general passed them both without a word, and they fell silent. Blake moved to the water station, pausing just inches before the table. The courthouse employee behind it, the same woman who had refused Ellis earlier, straightened instinctively, her hand suddenly unsure of where to rest. Her eyes flicked from the stars on his collar to the medals spanning his chest. Her mouth parted slightly as if to speak, but nothing came. The general did not speak. He reached forward and lifted a single bottle of water, the last one on the table. His hand, steady and gloved, grasped it as gently as one might lift a folded flag. He nodded once toward the attendant, not in thanks, but in finality. Then he turned. Ellis hadn't moved from his bench, not an inch. Still upright, though the heat had deepened the shadows beneath his eyes. Still silent, though the plaza now thrummed with an almost electric stillness. The pigeon had returned to its planter behind him, hopping once, then settling on the lip of the stone. A leaf fluttered from a tree above, spiraling slowly downward, tracing an invisible line between the bench and the table. Blake walked toward him, and with every step, the space grew quieter. Children stopped fidgeting. Conversations faded. Even the breeze seemed to pause as the general reached the edge of the bench. He stood before the seated veteran, not as a man higher in rank, not as one holding office, but as something entirely else. Then slowly, he lowered himself, not to sit, but to kneel. One knee met the ground with careful control. His back remained straight, his arm extended, the bottle of water cradled between both gloved palms. He held it out as if offering something sacred, not simply water, but peace, recognition, apology, reverence. His head bowed slightly, just enough to acknowledge what words could not. Ellis looked down. His fingers twitched once, then again. He reached forward, not quickly, not greedily, and accepted the bottle as if it were something weightier than it seemed. He did not thank him. He did not speak, but his eyes met Blake's, and something passed between them, something invisible to the crowd, but felt all the same, like a current through still water. He twisted the cap slowly, drank once, then lowered the bottle into his lap. The general stood without haste, brushed nothing from his knee, said nothing still. And in that silence, the hush of sunlit stone, sweat on brass, and breath held by 50 people who hadn't even realized they'd been holding it, a truth finally settled over the courtyard. This was not a performance. This was a reckoning. The general's rising form drew every gaze like gravity. The kneel had not been grand, nor the gesture rehearsed. Yet somehow, as he stood tall again, the world around them rearranged itself. The heat, the murmurs, the gawking stares. It all receded behind a thick, reverent silence. His uniform caught the sun as he stepped forward, each decoration like a seal from time itself. The administrator stiffened before he reached her, clipboard still clutched to her chest like a shield. Her lips were pressed thin now, her previous sharpness subdued not by fear but by something heavier: exposure. The intern who had tried to offer the bottle earlier now stood awkwardly to the side, hands tucked in his back pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. Blake stopped just short of her, close enough that she could feel the weight of what he carried. Not in his hands, but in his bearing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Do you know who this man is?" His words fell like a stone into the quiet. The administrator blinked, visibly flustered. Her fingers tapped nervously at the clipboard. "A trespasser?" she answered, with a brittle sort of detachment, as if clinging to the last thread of control. "He's not listed on any." Blake took a step forward. "Not aggressive, not threatening, but enough. This man taught me to survive in mud that would have swallowed you whole," he said calmly, each word landing like the slow toll of a bell. "When you couldn't lift your head from a pillow, he was lifting men onto medevac choppers with a bullet in his leg." The administrator opened her mouth again, perhaps to offer justification or a softened apology, but nothing came out. She simply stood there, her clipboard lowering slowly as if it, too, understood the moment no longer belonged to her. Ellis hadn't moved from the bench. He remained still, the bottle now resting loosely in his hand, condensation forming like dew against the heat of his palm. His cap had slid slightly on the bench beside him, but he made no attempt to adjust it. The general's words seemed to reach him like a distant echo, not surprising, not new, but like a verse repeated from an old prayer he'd never dared speak aloud himself. Then came the shift. From the crowd, subtle, like a wave breaking far from shore, a man in a battered ball cap, plain blue, no logos, but sweat-stained and familiar, stepped forward from the edge of the gathering. He was older, with a slight limp and a tan line where a wristwatch had once been. He raised one hand, slow and steady, and brought it to his brow. A salute, not crisp, not formal, but honest. Another man followed, younger this one, his blazer unbuttoned, a small pin at his lapel. He didn't salute, but he stood straighter, pulling his shoulders back, head high. Then another, and another. One by one they came from the sidewalk, the shade, the corners of the courtyard. Veterans, sons of veterans, quiet men in short sleeves with forearms lined in faded ink. Women who'd spent 20 years in quiet service. A father holding his son's hand. A man in a delivery uniform. A woman with a walker. No one spoke, but they all stood, slowly, as if summoned not by command, but by something deeper. The administrator looked around now, her gaze darting from one face to the next, realizing she was surrounded not by spectators but by witnesses, and not one of them was on her side. The general didn't turn to acknowledge them. He already knew. This wasn't for show. This wasn't about rank. It never had been. He simply stepped aside. The intern, eyes glassy now, moved forward too, pulling a second bottle of water from his bag. This time, no one stopped him. No protocol. No clipboard. Just the instinctive correction of a moment too far gone to fix, but not too late to honor. He set the bottle beside Ellis, nodded once, then stepped back into the quiet. A breeze passed through the courtyard then, rustling the leaves above, fluttering the edges of the flag hanging limp on the courthouse pole. For a moment, the sound of birds returning to the nearby branches filled the air. The pigeon behind Ellis had flown off. In its place a sparrow had landed, still, watchful. And there they stood, a general, a soldier, a bench, and a crowd now tethered not by outrage or spectacle, but by reverence. The old man had not asked for water, had not asked for recognition, had not demanded a thing. But now he was surrounded by people who understood that sometimes dignity isn't declared. It is endured until someone else finally kneels. They remained like that for a while, the crowd holding its breath, the moment refusing to yield. No one knew exactly what they were waiting for, perhaps a word, perhaps a gesture. But what came instead was silence, and in that silence, something rare, understanding. General Blake stepped back toward the bench where Ellis sat, his shoulders easing now, not from fatigue, but from reverence. He removed his service cap and set it down beside Ellis's on the wooden slats. The two brims touched gently, their peaks aligned like a silent agreement passed between warriors. One stiff with age, the other sharp with command, yet both shaped by the same storms. Ellis did not speak. His breathing had steadied. The bottle of water now sat on his thigh, unopened again, condensation pooling into the crease of his trousers. His fingers rested atop it, not gripping, not idle, just resting, as if deciding whether to stay in this moment a little longer. The general eased himself down beside him, careful with the movement. It was not the kind of bench one would normally share without asking, but no request was needed here. There was no space between them that had not already been crossed decades before, in mud, in fear, in duty. They sat side by side, the heat folding around them like a thick, invisible blanket. The shade from the building offered no real reprieve, but neither man moved to seek it. Sweat traced lines down their temples, slow and patient, like time itself revisiting familiar trails. Ellis finally raised the bottle to his lips again. A second sip, smaller than the first. He swallowed, eyes closed, not from exhaustion, but from memory. A breeze stirred a nearby tree. Its leaves rustled gently, like pages of an old book being turned by hands long gone. Somewhere, a child giggled. A bird called from the far edge of the courtyard. The crowd had not dispersed. They stood still, respectful. Some shifted weight from foot to foot, unsure whether to go. Others remained rooted, arms crossed, gazes soft. One man took off his hat. Another simply closed his eyes for a moment, as if whispering a prayer not meant to be heard aloud. A courthouse clerk stepped forward, paused, then retreated. No one wanted to break it. The moment had become sacred, not grand, not loud, just complete. Blake leaned slightly forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped between them. He didn't glance at Ellis, nor did Ellis turn toward him. And yet, every breath they drew seemed calibrated to the same rhythm. The brims of their caps touched still. That detail, that quiet, intentional overlap, said what neither man needed to. This was not ceremony. This was not performance. This was kinship, forged in the kind of places most people spend their whole lives avoiding. A young woman near the steps reached for her phone, then thought better of it. Her hand fell to her side. She turned to her son, barely taller than her waist, and whispered something in his ear. He looked toward the bench, wide-eyed and curious. Then she knelt, adjusted his shirt collar, and stood with him again, not watching the men now, but facing the flag above them, still limp in the windless air, but no less proud. The water bottle let out a soft crinkle as Ellis shifted it in his grip. He looked down at the bench, at the caps, then out again, beyond the walkway, past the fountain, past the courthouse, to something only he could see. Perhaps a jungle trail from decades past, perhaps a brother lost, perhaps just the next step in a life lived long and full and quiet. General Blake adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. The ribbons on his chest, silent colors, each earned, not given, shimmered faintly in the heat. He reached into the inside of his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and withdrew something small, a folded piece of cloth maybe, or a slip of ribbon, wrapped carefully. He didn't offer it. He just set it beside the bottle. Then he stood again, not abruptly, not as a declaration, just as a man who knows when a moment has passed, but doesn't want to rush it away. Ellis watched him rise, nodded faintly, and then looked forward again. The two caps remained side by side, edges touching. The old man, the soldier, still sat tall, and for now, for this moment, no one moved to interrupt. By late afternoon, the golden heat had begun to mellow. The shadows of the trees lengthened across the pale courthouse stone, stretching gently toward the bench where two caps still rested, brim to brim, untouched. Most of the onlookers had drifted back into the building or down the sidewalk, pulled by routines and obligations, though not one soul departed without glancing back. And then from the far end of the lot, a white van pulled in, quiet, cautious. The side door slid open, and two people emerged. A man with a shoulder-mounted camera, and a woman in a navy blouse with a clipboard pressed tight against her chest. Local news, probably tipped off by someone in the crowd. They hadn't come for a soundbite. They had come for a reckoning. The woman hesitated, clearly scanning for someone in charge. She saw the general first. Hard to miss, even in stillness. She made her approach with the studied grace of someone who'd once been trained not to ask too much. "General Blake," she said gently, voice low. "I'm sorry to intrude. We're with Channel 12. He nodded once, not irritated, not eager, just acknowledging. "We heard what happened with the water station. The video's already moving fast online," she added. "Would you be willing to comment?" For a moment, Blake said nothing. Then he looked over at Ellis, still seated, his hands folded atop the unopened bottle, chin resting lightly against the rise of his chest. His eyes weren't closed, but they were far away. And that's when the general made his decision. "I'll speak," he said, stepping off the stone walk and into the frame of the setting sun. The camera was already rolling when he began. No podium, no prepared speech, just words. "I was 19, Blake said quietly. "South Korea, winter. We were assigned a hill no one believed we could take. They said it was suicide. We'd barely made it halfway up before we lost comms, lost cover. The medic was dead. The lieutenant was unconscious. I was the only one left moving, and I couldn't feel anything below my right knee." He paused, not for drama, but memory. A breath passed. I would have died there. Would have frozen in place with a bullet lodged in my femur and a mouth full of blood. But that man, he nodded toward Ellis, he came back for me. Crawled the length of that hill on his elbows because his hip had been shattered by shrapnel 3 days earlier. Carried me 200 yards on his back before he blacked out from blood loss. The reporter held the mic a little closer, but still didn't speak. No questions were necessary. He didn't brag, didn't write a book, didn't tell anyone, not even me, that he'd been denied the Silver Star for too few witnesses. Didn't complain when they told him he'd never walk again. He just got up, trained more soldiers, built more warriors, and every year, on this exact day, he comes here, not for himself but for the son of a man he saved. A flicker of motion from behind the camera, the assistant wiping a tear with the back of her wrist. Blake looked down, steady now, not angry, just resolved. And today, he was denied water, a beat. Not because of a threat, not because of a breach, but because someone decided his presence was inconvenient. He let that hang in the air. Sharp, undiluted truth, then softer, more personal. I owe my life to that man. And that's not sentiment, that's arithmetic, that's battlefield math. The camera clicked off. A moment passed, too full for clapping. Then, just behind the cameraman, someone shifted. A young father with a child perched on his hip. The boy leaned toward the bench, squinting at the two caps. He pointed, tugged his dad's collar. "Which one's the general?" The father answered with a whisper Ellis could not hear, but perhaps he didn't need to. Ellis reached for his cane, tapping it once gently against the flagstone. Blake turned and approached him again. He placed a hand on Ellis's shoulder, not for comfort, not for show, just to say, "I remember." Ellis didn't respond with words. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, a black and white image, frayed at the edges. 4 men in uniform, standing ankle-deep in mud, rifles slung, expressions unreadable. He held it out to Blake, who took it with careful hands. "That's you," Ellis said, his voice a gravel whisper. "Far left." Blake stared at the photo a long while. "3 of us are gone," he finally said. Ellis nodded. "But we carried them all the same." They sat again, quiet once more, the weight of the memory heavier than the heat. Across the courtyard, the intern who had once offered Ellis a bottle of water now stood in the shade of the building's columns, eyes red, spine straight. He had seen the broadcast, had watched his boss reprimand the very man who had likely made it possible for that flag to fly above the courthouse. And now, he knew who he'd turned away.
By evening, the light had mellowed into a quiet bronze, the heat retreating into the bricks and concrete where it would hum softly through the night. The courthouse, once humming with impatient footsteps and clicking pens, had gone near silent, emptied of its midday bustle, but not its weight. Something had shifted in the air, and not just in temperature. The bench remained.
Its surface now bore the memory of shared stillness, where two men had sat without a script, and where silence had done more than any speech might dare. But when Ellis and Blake finally stood and departed, neither in ceremony nor with crowd, the bench didn't remain untouched for long. Maintenance crews had been called, but not for cleanup. They arrived quietly, one with a small drill, the other with a box marked Veterans Office, reserved hardware. No announcement was made, no press release. Only a piece of stainless steel, 6 inches wide and engraved with words that didn't ask for permission. Only acknowledgement. Master Sergeant Ellis Monroe. 3 wars. No regrets. 1 country. The plaque was fixed into the stone plank beneath where his cane had rested. The bench itself was lightly sanded, varnished in place, as if to preserve not just a seat, but a moment in time. And beneath the plaque, at Blake's instruction, something else was installed. A hydration station. Not gaudy, not large, a sleek pedestal-style unit in navy blue. Stainless accents. At its top, a small spout beneath a bronze button, kept cool from a shaded waterline, rerouted beneath the courthouse steps. And just above that button, another inscription, etched in clean military block letters. For those who served, take what you need. It was not charity. It was not apology. It was provision, born from respect. Permanent, not performative. Inside the courthouse, the building's director, a man with silver hair and a tie still stiff from morning meetings, stepped into the empty foyer. Behind him, the once unbending administrator stood with her hands loosely clasped, no clipboard in sight. He cleared his throat. "Issue a formal apology," he said. "Not just to Sergeant Monroe, but to any veteran we've ever turned away with a policy before a handshake." She nodded, barely audibly, but her eyes didn't meet his. "And start training the staff," he added. "Kindness first, procedure second." Outside, beneath the waning light, something was already taking shape. People who had once passed by without pausing now lingered. One woman knelt to read the plaque aloud to her teenage son. Another snapped a photo and texted it silently to someone who hadn't spoken since coming home. And not far from the new water station, the young intern returned, the same bottle still in his bag. This time, he placed it gently beside the fountain, unscrewed the cap, and poured it out into the small recessed drain. A quiet gesture, a replacement. His eyes never left the inscription above the spout. Inside a nearby office window, General Blake stood watching. He said nothing, just observed. The world had not been changed by a speech, nor a press conference, nor outrage. It had been changed by a man who asked for nothing, and stood still long enough for the truth to catch up to him. And now, that truth had a nameplate, a fixture, a station. No one would be turned away here again, not without a hand reaching first. A week later, the morning arrived in soft layers, dew still clinging to the courthouse lawn, the air brushed clean from a night's slow rainfall. The concrete steps, once harsh in midday glare, now held a gentle sheen beneath the rising sun. The bench waited. The plaque shone. This time there was no crowd, no conflict, no ceremony. Just a man, no longer in uniform, but dressed as he had always dressed when no one was watching. Pressed slacks, polished shoes, a collared shirt, white as the field of a flag, with a single button undone at the throat. In one hand, a simple cane. In the other, a plain blue cap folded neatly at his side. Ellis Monroe walked slower now, not from pain, but from presence. His steps, though measured, held none of the exhaustion from a week before. He paused at the edge of the steps, gazed up at the columns and nodded. Not to the building, but to something deeper it now represented. He had returned, Not because he had to, but because he always had. This time, he would stay longer. Waiting just ahead, beside the hydration station, stood the same young intern. Not in a suit, not in uniform, but in a simple olive shirt tucked respectfully into khakis. His hands were not empty. One held a cold bottle of water. The other extended it before Ellis could say a word. Ellis accepted it quietly. Their hands met for a second longer than needed. There was no rank between them, no age, no record, just a passing of dignity, one man to another. Moments later, from across the plaza, General Blake approached. No entourage, no dress uniform, a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled. Civilian now, at least in appearance, though the posture remained unmistakable. They did not salute. They did not embrace. They simply sat, side by side once again, on the bench that now bore Ellis's name. The general removed his cap, resting it gently on his knee. Ellis did the same. Their brims touched again. Across the walkway, a small group began to gather. Not because of Ellis. Not yet. But because of the plaque. Fathers read the words aloud to sons. A woman paused, whispered a quiet thanks, and kissed her fingers before placing them gently on the bench's edge. And then, something new. A boy, no more than 8 or 9, broke away from his parents. His sneakers made no sound as he approached. He stood in front of Ellis, uncertain but brave, his voice hushed by awe. "My granddad was in the war too," he said. Ellis looked at him, those clear, unsure eyes searching for something to hold on to. He nodded. "He still is," Ellis replied, tapping the boy gently on the heart with 2 fingers. The boy stood taller. Then, with no instruction, he raised his hand in a small, imperfect salute. Ellis, for the first time in years, returned it. A perfect line, steady as steel, held for a full breath longer than needed. The boy beamed, and the world, at least for that moment, understood something older than paperwork, older than politics, older than time. It understood honor, not the kind pinned to a chest or shouted across a stage, but the kind lived, breath by breath, without applause. Ellis stayed on that bench for another hour. Then 2 more people came, some with coffee, some with nothing but time. The water flowed freely now, no restriction, no red tape, no hesitation, just cool, simple grace, waiting for those who had already given everything. The administrator never returned, but her shadow had long since left the pavement, replaced now by something firmer, a tradition, a quiet one, born not from policy, but from principle, a place where old soldiers could rest, where young children could learn, and where every once in a while, a general could kneel. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.